Hello, genealogists. This is Craig, and we begin our process of examining genealogical standards as found in the second edition revised of Genealogical Standards, which was produced by the Board for Certification of Genealogists. And this is where I caveat and say I do not represent the Board for the Certification of Genealogists. I am just an associate of the board. I'm not a trustee. I have never been a trustee. However, I believe firmly in the standards and what the Board for Certification of Genealogists means. You will hear this each time that we discuss a standard at the very beginning so that everybody is perfectly clear that you're not going to say, but Craig Scott said. All I'm going to give you is my opinion on the matter, and it's worth about squat. And we'll leave it at that. So today, we're going to discuss Chapter 2, Standards of Documenting. And as is my process, as we enter each chapter, I'll sort of give an overview of the chapter, and then I will talk about the first standard in that chapter. And then the next time we meet and discuss standards, we will discuss the next standard in that chapter until we get to the next chapter. So the first chapter is Chapter 2. It's found on page 5. And it deals with standards for documenting. And the highlights of why we have standards for documenting are that it's fundamental to planning and executing genealogical research, collecting and recording data, and compiling research results. Documentation just does not appear in our final product. It appears throughout all of our working papers, throughout everything we do. You don't cite after the fact. Now, what I mean by cite is you don't polish your citation in the beginning, but you collect the necessary facts to create a citation and then polish your citation at the end as a function of the editorial style sheet that you are publishing for. So the pieces of your documentation are fairly standard, so you can collect them. But editorial style sheets determine how you arrange them, and that's what the issue is. So it doesn't do you any good to create an NGSQ style formatted citation when you're publishing in the register. Just an example. So shared materials will include articles, blogs, charts, forms, family histories, lineage society applications, and reports. That's what we do. We share materials. Well, they have to be cited. Otherwise, they're that genealogical word that runs through my mind all the time. Sometimes when I read things, they're crap. Remember that documentation also appears in educational material for genealogists, and that the genealogical proof standard requires complete and accurate citations to the source or sources for each information item supporting a claim that a conclusion is proved. There are 8 standards to address genealogical documentation. They are scope, specificity, purposes, citation uses, citation elements, format, shortcuts, and separation safeguards. So today we're going to discuss scope. And basically, I'll read it and then I'll discuss it. I'm only going to read it because I want you all to hear it. Because reading something is not the same as hearing something. If you want to read along with me, that's fine. Scope. Genealogists use citations to identify the sources of all substantive information and images they gather, use, or plan to gather or use, except sources of common knowledge beyond dispute, such as the years of a major historical event, and it reminds us to see the glossary for definitions of citation, image, information, and source. And I would suggest that you go to the glossary and read each one of those. So the interesting words in this are substantive, and then the words common knowledge. One of the problems that I encounter as a genealogist is my head is full of stuff. So for me, what's inside my head is common knowledge. For you, what's inside your head actually is common knowledge. But the question becomes, is it in somebody else's head? If it's in somebody else's head and in your head, yep, that's common knowledge. If it's inside your head but not in anybody else's head, that's not common knowledge. And that's one of the problems that we encounter, is we think that everybody knows what we know, and that's not the case. Then there's the issue of substantive. The issue is you have to balance your citations. In other words, if the narrative is a paragraph and the citations for that narrative are 3 pages long, you've made a mistake. At least I think you have. There's also the possibility that maybe you need to embed some citations or something when we get further down the line and start talking specifically about how to cite a source. Once we finish this, then that'll be fun. I promise you, it'll be fun. So you have to understand what substantive information means, as well as common knowledge. I can't suggest to you what substantive means. I believe that what you create in your proof is a foundation, and you build on that foundation, and that if it's a brick in your foundation, you got to cite it. If it's grass beside the house, maybe not. But if it's part of your proof, you have to cite it. And I'll leave it at that. So those are the 2 issues that exist in scope. Recognize you have to cite everything that is substantive. And recognize that you don't cite things that are common knowledge. It's up to you to determine what is substantive. Recognize that what you determine is substantive will be scrutinized by other people. So recognize that anything that relates to your proof, you're going to have to cite. And also recognize that common knowledge doesn't necessarily mean what you think it does. Common knowledge means that it is common. Everybody knows it. Although these days and times, you can't always be sure that people even know what the Civil War was all about, or what years it was fought in, or who was on what side. Just go out to the internet and see what people are saying. So this has been Craig. This has been Just Genealogy, where we finally begun to look at genealogy standards. And we've now dealt with the first standard. Standard number 1, scope. So remember, standard number 1, scope. We will be discussing next time that we talk about standards, standard number 2, which is specificity. Y'all have a good time.